Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining in and watching this. I hope that you're encouraged by this. I just want to, for a second, before we start, I just want to remind everyone of how much we're loved and how God sees us. Just for a second, wherever you are, would you just repeat after me, just out loud? Ready? Right now, out loud. Just go with it. Just repeat out loud. I am loved. God loves me. He has a plan for my life. Just say that. We just need to hear that over and over and over again. I know I need to be encouraged by that. Whenever we have these discouraging thoughts, just say those words out loud. I am loved. God loves me and has a plan for my life. Say that over and over out loud. Well, for the past few days, I've been a bachelor at home. My family is they went up to L.A. To my wife's parents' house, and so my kids like going up there, being with family, and so they've been up there for a few days. And my wife said they were going to come back today, and she said we're going to go back home to see Daddy. And my daughter said, "Can we just stay here?" Yeah, so, okay. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to take that personal, right? But they have fun there. There's a lot of people there, and they like to play in the backyard, but anyway. But I thanks for being here. Last week, we started this message in the book of Mark, and started in chapter 4, and we saw how Jesus commanded that the disciples go with him to the other side of the lake, and they encountered this storm. And we saw how Jesus just didn't see this storm as something to get through, but he saw it as to use it as a breakthrough, to reveal himself to his disciples in ways they've never experienced before. And so we pick up in chapter 5 now, where the completion of what Jesus intended happens. They get to the other side of the lake. And we see what Jesus had in mind now that they had crossed. Let's pick up in verses 1 through 2 of chapter 5 in the book of Mark. It says, "So they arrived on the other side of the lake, in the region of the Garrisons. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him." Came out from the tombs to meet him. This man was literally living in a cemetery. He was demon-possessed, and he was living in a cemetery. It gives a picture of how this man felt on the inside. His surroundings was a picture of how he felt. He was living among the dead, depicting on how he felt on the inside. He felt dead. He felt lifeless. In other words, there was this projection of the decisions he made on the outside. It determined or gave a picture of how he felt on the inside. He isolated himself from others. Proverbs 15:15 says that a miserable heart brings a miserable life. That there's this idea of projection that this man was showing. That oftentimes we project on the outside, and we make the choices for our lives of how we feel about ourselves. And we see this happening in our lives as well. Like if you put yourself on a strict diet, all of a sudden you begin to get super critical of others when you see them eating McDonald's, right? You're like, how could they eat that? Don't they know how bad that is for them, right? We're critical of ourselves. We're critical of others. And I've done this too in my life when I just had a bad day and just not feeling that good about myself. I have literally made trips to the grocery store just to buy a pint of ice cream. I call it eating my feelings, right? I'm just kind of projecting what's on the inside. You may see this too, where you get criticized in your office or put down by a boss or a supervisor, and you go home and you're critical of your spouse and of your kids. It even happens sometimes when you're driving. I was at a stoplight, and I was finishing a text, and it turned green, and I didn't realize it. And the person behind me honked at me, and I was, okay, and started to go. And then he pulled up next to me and rolled down his window and said, "Get off your blank phone." Yeah. I was like, and I just thought to myself, he obviously is not feeling that good about himself today, right? And here's the thing, oftentimes that we project how we feel by the decisions that we make, and we don't even really realize it sometimes until we're faced with the reality of our decisions afterwards. It's kind of like that middle school bully effect where the kid who hated himself the most caused the most pain for others. Have you ever heard that phrase of hurting people hurt others? Or misery loves company? And as we see in this demon-possessed man, he's projecting on the outside of how he feels on the inside. And he's as close to death as he could get and still be living in a cemetery. I heard a story recently of a teenage daughter who was beginning to date this boy who was using recreational drugs, and he had just gotten kicked out of high school for truancy, and her parents were just so concerned because they could see where it was going, and they just didn't know what to do. And finally, a father comes home, and he tells his family that they're going to take a mission trip to the country of Kenya, and they're going to serve in an orphanage for a week. The daughter was just furious, and she fought them up until the time it was time to leave for the airport. They arrive at the orphanage, and for an entire week, they hold babies, they play with toddlers, and they scrimmage the kids in soccer. At the end of their time, when they were about to leave, their daughter was just filled with tears, not wanting to leave the kids that she grew to love. And when they came back home, about a week later, her parents discovered that she had broken up with her boyfriend. And when they asked her why, she said, I think I'm better than that. See, because her view of herself was elevated because of the admiration of these children, it reflected in the elevation of her choices she made for her life. And here's the thing, the opposite is true as well. Maybe for you, we see it all the time when someone's put down harshly by a teacher or a parent and told that they're not going to amount to anything. It just scars them emotionally, and because they just don't feel good about themselves, they never take the risk to achieve their goals or to achieve anything that they think they're just not worthy of. Or because maybe you have a past scarred with failure that you just begin to believe, I just have to live in that. I don't have the ability to influence anyone else. Or maybe your thoughts even play lies in your head too. Like, well, I'm too old. I don't have what it takes to influence my grandkids. They won't like me. I can't relate to them. Instead of engaging, we isolate ourselves because we think, I just don't have what it takes. And how we feel about ourselves is reflected in the decisions that we make. And we see this in this man who was demon-possessed, that he's projecting outwardly how he feels about himself inwardly. Let's continue to read. It gives a little more backstory into the life of this man. It says in verses 3 through 5, this man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. How humiliating it was for this man. I mean, can you imagine for a second that your very own people are isolating you, ostracizing you from society, treating you like an animal. And he's completely isolated from everyone. And here's the thing. I think that's the enemy's goal for our lives. Just how the enemy isolated this man from society, I think the enemy wants to isolate us from others as well. Because this is true. When we are at our weakest, when we are at our loneliest, we are at our weakest when we're at our loneliest. And that's the enemy's goal for your life. Something that I enjoy doing. I like watching these animal shows or these clips on YouTube where, especially specifically the lion hunts. And what I love watching is how these lions go about hunting their prey. And what they do is they hide in the bushes while the pack of zebras or wildebeests or water buffalo run by. And then what they try to do as a pack, they try to separate one of the animals from the herd. Because when an animal is isolated from the herd, they're easier to take down. And just as an animal is most vulnerable to attack when it's separated, so are we at our weakest when we are at our loneliest. 1 Peter says this, stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And what's his strategy? To keep you isolated, to disconnect you from others. Because when we are the loneliest, that's when we're at our weakest. Proverbs 18:1 says this, he who separates himself seeks his own desire. He quarrels against all sound wisdom. And this is never more true than the times we're living in now. That this time of lockdown and shutdown, and the scientists say that the distance keeps us physically safe, but what we see in Scripture, and you see this in our own lives, that what keeps us the healthiest emotionally and mentally is being connected. A recent survey done by the CDC showed that through the survey that they did of over 5,000 people across all ages and occupations, that 31% of them admitted to having thoughts of anxiety and depression, and 13 of them admitted to turning to substance abuse to cope. And here's the thing. Isolation doesn't mean that you're alone. Isolation means that your life is void of truth tellers. Your life is void of having people in your life to tell you the truth when you need to hear it and to encourage you when you fail. That's why the church was created. That's why Jesus created the church, so that we would have people around us, because he knew that we are stronger together than we ever are alone. Because we're at our weakest, when we're at our loneliest. And this man who was living isolated from society was sick and tired and knew that he needed to change. And so he ran to the one, Jesus, who could change it all. Look with me as we read in verses 6 through 9. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" What is your name? What's your name? What's your name? Jesus asked him. Do you see what Jesus is doing here? Jesus is humanizing this man once again. That in the witness of everyone around him, he is bringing him back to the level of everyone else and deeming him a human, just like everyone who's watching. He's restoring him back to the level that he once was. That despite his race, despite his family background, despite his ethnicity, despite his problems, despite his possession, that he is a creation of God. And he's valued in his sight. How humiliating it was to be treated the way he was. But Jesus sees through his problems, he sees through his past, he sees through his possession, and he sees a child who has great potential, and who is valued, and who is loved. That's what Jesus is doing, saying, "What is your name? What is your name?" And I imagine that there's somebody watching right now, listening to my voice, and they need to be reminded of their value in the eyes of God. to be reminded once and for all that you are not defined by your problems. That in you there is no mistake about you. That there is value for your life. That God has a plan for your future, and He has a purpose He desires for you to fulfill, no matter what age you are. That you have value. Jesus asks, what is your name? What's your name? What's your name? Let's continue reading as Jesus demanded, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man. When the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place, there happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. Send us into those pigs, the spirits begged. Let us enter them. So Jesus gave permission. I love that. Jesus gave permission that even in this moment that He still had all authority, even over the demons. He gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs. And the entire herd of 2,000 pigs plunged to the steep hills, down the steep hillside, into the land, into the lake, and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. The crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. He was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane. And they were all afraid. Now, this was a predominantly Gentile area. This was southeast of the Sea of Galilee, on the east side of the Jordan River. And it was indicated that it was a Gentile community based upon the herd of pigs nearby. Now, for the Jewish community, pigs were deemed as unclean to eat, and so you would have never found a herd of pigs in a Jewish community. And the questions that arise is one is why would the pigs, or why would the demons want to go into the herd of pigs? And I heard one scholar quoted saying that demons desire embodiment to destroy, much like a vandal desires a can of spray paint. That this picture that the enemy desires to kill, steal, and destroy. And possibly that this happens so that the people around would see the destructive nature of the demons. And then the other question would be, why would Jesus allow it to happen? And I guess one guess is that people around them would see what was happening in this man. That just as the demons killed these pigs, so were the demons stealing the life out of this man. And the village people around heard and saw what had happened. And instead of being drawn to Jesus, they were afraid of him. Instead of accepting Jesus into their community, they asked him to leave. And partially because maybe they were more concerned with their livelihood and the loss that happened due to the herd of pigs than they were with their own lives. And so Jesus left. See, Jesus doesn't force himself into anyone's life. But when he is invited, he demands full control. Full control. That's why, because since you've decided to follow Jesus, you can't do the same things that you once did. That there's now this thing called conviction in you that doesn't allow you to get the same enjoyment out of the same things that you did before. And for example, that you have this desire to walk into a coworker's office and just to curse them out and to give them a piece of your mind. But yet there's this conviction that comes over you that you can't do it. It stops you. Maybe that now you watch movies that you once watched before following Jesus, and now things affect you differently than they did before. The language bothers you, the graphic scenes disturb you, and the violence turns you off. And now, once was entertainment, now is just kind of disgusting. See, there's this convicting happening within you. And that's Jesus in your life. Those are the guardrails that Jesus has placed to shape you into the person he's called you to be. So don't resist it. Don't run from it. Accept it. And knowing that Jesus is guiding us and forming us into the people that he's called us to be so that we fulfill the purpose he has for our life. I want to read this last part of what happens. And before we end, it says this in verse, let's see. Let's go to the next one here. The last part. It says this. I think it's at the very, very end when they okay, here we go. Verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed, begged to go with him. But Jesus said to him, no. What does Jesus say? Go home. Go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. You see what Jesus did here? Jesus says, you go. You go. Jesus says, you go back to your family. You go back to your people and you declare what I have done. You declare the power that you have seen and you be a living testimony of what Jesus can do. That's what Jesus is saying. He's telling him to go. Jesus tells him to go back to the community, back to the people, to no longer be isolated, no, not anymore, but to go back to people, to go back to connection. And he not only sends him back, but he sends him back with a purpose to proclaim God's power. That this man goes from being demon-possessed and being ostracized by his society, living in a cemetery, projecting the death that he felt on the inside, to now he becomes could be considered one of the first missionaries to the Gentile people, declaring the power of God. He sends him in with a purpose. That no longer is he defined by who he was, but he's defined by who Jesus declares him to be. The same is true for our lives as well. That there is a purpose for your future. It doesn't matter if you're 9 or you're 90. If you have oxygen in your lungs, there's a purpose for your life. To be connected with others and to influence others to experience who Jesus is. So own it. Never believe the lies that you are beyond the ability to influence. That you've messed up too much to have a purpose. That you have too many struggles now to play a part in the church. No. Jesus says, you go. You go. And you go and be connected. And you go and influence. See, we serve a God who is in the business of including the isolated, freeing the addicted, connecting the outcasts, and giving purpose to the hopeless. That's the God we serve. And that's what he wants for you. For you to begin no longer to be defined by your past or your problems or your struggles. But you remind yourself of the value that you have in Jesus and you begin to live in the purpose he has for your life, being connected to others and being an influence for Jesus. Maybe for you, it's taking taking responsibility to be an influence in the lives of your grandkids. And you think, maybe you've thought to yourself, oh, they don't, I can't relate, or they don't want me around. Oh, but they need you. You be that influence. Maybe for you, thought, well, Garrison, I've messed up too much to volunteer here at the church. There's not a role for me. You wouldn't want me around. You don't know what I've done. We're called to be connected. We're called to be an influence for Him. So let me encourage you. If you feel like you're isolated and without connection, New Hope wants to be help for you. I want to encourage you. We have small groups that meet weekly, some via Zoom through the internet, or some that meet in person, whatever you're comfortable with. But I would encourage you. No, don't live in your isolation anymore. Seek to be connected to others. We are at our strongest when we are the most connected, when we're together. Just as we are the weakest when we're the loneliest, Jesus created the church so we could be stronger together than we are apart. I would encourage you right now, if you want to join a small group, text the word New Hope to 94,000. Text just the word New Hope to the number 94000. I'll get that text and I'll respond to you. And here's the goal. That we as a church, you watching, begin to live in the purpose that Jesus has for your life. No longer be defined by your past or your present struggles. But we can step in the purpose He has for our life and the value He's declared us to have. Thanks for watching.